This DVD of memories from their dash, as well as my documented historical trilogy, Sandspurs, which relate the remarkable 100 years of history in Salemburg from 1874 to 1974, would never have been possible without the help of many people, especially Salemburg's mayor, Bobby Strickland, and his wife, Pauline. Their extraordinary work, seen and unseen, created a renaissance for the town. Buildings have been replaced, many that were old and falling down. Numerous old structures have been saved and revived. Thank you, Pauline and Bobby Strickland, for all of your efforts over 30-plus years, seen and unseen. And thank you to all the many folks who aided me in publishing this history. Shirley McLam Cooper, at the home of Betty Holland in Salemburg, North Carolina, January the 31st, 2012.
December the 11th, 1935. Dr. Donnie Royal of Salemburg delivered me at my granddaddy Martin Strickland's house. That's where I was born, in Hamburg, which is about 4 miles out of Salemburg. As we grew up, I was probably about 12 years old. Salemburg had a theater. Salemburg was quite large at that time. I have just lately made a list of all the businesses that were in town at the time I came to work in town at 18. Which I think they all were there when I was about 12. There was about 42 different businesses. And to name a few, it was Ramby Royal's grocery store, John Two's clothing store, Sneed's 5 and 10 cent, Rob Williams dry cleaners, Eve's beauty shop. We had 2 barber shops. One was Hall's barber shop and Barefoot's barber shop, and even a shoe shop that was called Bullock's Shoe Shop. Back then we didn't get quite so many shoes, and so they were repaired. I've worn lots of shoes after I got grown and my foot quit growing that had been repaired. Our feet grew so fast as children that we didn't quite wear them out so quickly. But my dad and my 2 brothers loved these Western movies that were showing at the Alice Theater. And Mom and my sister and myself were not that much about movies. But every Saturday night, the store stayed open late. All the stores were open, and people were beginning to come to the movies. The theater would be full, and so we would come with Dad and the boys, and we would just browse around town and go to a Two's store and look at the clothing, and Mom might pick up something, and we'd go down to Sneed's 5 and 10 and pick up an item or two, and we always went, that was our treat, to Ramby Royal's grocery store. And Mom would get all 3 of us a Pepsi. And they were big then. I think they have kind of shrunk a little now. And she'd get a large box of Fig Newtons. That was really a treat. And we'd sit in the car and munch on our Fig Newtons and drink our Pepsi Colas and watch the people walking the streets. It was busy. I mean, it was big time in Salemburg on Saturday night. And what really made my day on the following Monday was maybe a little boy that you kind of had your eye on would say, "Oh, I saw you in Salemburg Saturday night." And that would just really make my day for that day.
An interview with Sarah Roberts, Ashley Hollowell, and Norma Satterfield Ashley Funderburg at the home of Norma in Greensboro, North Carolina, March 10th, 2012.
One of the exciting things that brought my mother and dad together was on an early visit to Pineland. Our father came from Duke to see the school and see if he would like to come there and teach. Well, my grandmother met him, and she took him around to show him all about the school, and she was very encouraged from the very beginning that he come there. So she tried very hard to get him his interest. And while on his tour, he went by Mrs. Sampson's studio, where she did a lot of paintings of portraits and other things, and introduced him to my mother. And she was there posing for her portrait. And so he finishes his interview, and he's very excited. And I'm not sure, I think it was a letter that we received later that he accepted the fact that he'd like to come there and teach. In the meanwhile, he was writing his older sister, who had been very helpful in bringing him up because his mother died early. That he had met the girl that he was going to marry, and that he would come to Pineland to teach and all of that. And so here he came in his little Model T Ford and was there on the campus, and a very good part of the whole thing.
I interviewed Ruby Dubison in Clinton, North Carolina, February the 3rd, 2012.
My name is Ruby Dubison, and I grew up on Jones's farm. I was one of 5 children and the oldest. My 2 aunts had met this woman in uptown. And when I say uptown, I'm talking about Salemburg, because nobody went much further than Salemburg. And so this girl from Hamburg, her name was Maddie Bell Drohan, and she taken a liking to my uncle. So she went to Granddaddy's house and decided she liked it there, and she was going to stay there. Well, word got to Mr. Jones. And so that evening, as we were leaving the fields, he called my uncle over to his car. And he said, "Fleet, what's your intentions with Mad Bell?" He said, "Well, we're going to get married." He said, "We just haven't got over to the courthouse to do it done." Well, Mr. Jones said we could do it right now. And so in his car, he brings out this book, and he has this certificate. And he stands right there and marries her. Now, nasty, feet with her, barefooted, he married her. And it was a good marriage, because they raised 7 children.
Mary Fell Jones in Salemburg, North Carolina, January the 28th, 2012, at the home of Betty Holland.
I'm Mary Eiffel Sawyer Jones, and I was born in the town of the big city of Salemburg. I was born in one of the larger buildings down the street. Dr. Royal was the doctor to deliver me, and he was called to come and deliver me, and I was on the bed that the man that owned the building's mother had died. So I was born on the bed that Mr. Roby Butler's mother died. As soon as I was born, my daddy went back to South Carolina, where he and my mother had come from, and Dad had come up to teach at Salemburg High School as agriculture teacher. And he went to get my grandmother to come stay with my mother. And Miss Garney Butler stayed with mother until he was able to go down there and come back to get her, which was a good trip. In fact, mother said when she came the first time, she said, "Winfield, will I ever see my home again?" But I was able, from upstairs as I grew up, there are a lot of little stories that come to mind, living up in the building above the streets. And the building had a long porch that went, or we called it a porch, but it was actually a long wooden bit room with windows every so often where we could see out on the street. And at one end was the tree, which was Roby's tree, where he kept his feet on it quite often, every day. And I could see many things from the windows, and if there was something I couldn't see or I wanted to follow through, I could go from one end to the other with no trouble. And of course I saw many sights on Saturdays particular. And then again, the men that were under the street, I often wondered why we didn't hear more of men conversation, but then when I think about it, we made noises as we came down the wooden hallway or porch, and of course they knew we were up there above to hear, so they respected us and kept their special stories till later when they didn't have little ears for listening. But there were many things that we could see from there, and we could always see the cadets as they would come and do their practice for marching. And of course, I watched them from upstairs for a long time, but when I got a little older, I wanted to be on the street when they came through, so I could look at the boys a little bit closer.
This is Walt Owen in Roseboro, North Carolina, January 31st, 2012. He lives there with his wife, Rita, and if not for them, I would not have been able to write Sandspurs. They let me reside in their home for weeks at a time over a period of 5 years as I did my research and wrote my book.
My name is Walter Owen. I live in Roseboro, North Carolina in Sampson County. I was born here August 29th, 1941. My parents were Dennis and Jenny Owen, and I've been blessed to live here all my life. Roseboro is located in eastern Sampson County, and it's 4 miles from Salemburg. Well, when I was growing up, each of us had our own school system. They had theirs, well, we were all part of the county school system. And there was an intense rivalry between us. And everybody in Salemburg had a nickname. And I don't know anybody in Roseboro that had a nickname, but regardless, there was an intense rivalry between us. And it was sincere, and quite frankly, some of the feelings have lasted until today.
Roger White at the home of Betty Holland in Salemburg, North Carolina, February the 1st, 2012.
I'm Roger White, talking to Sharon Kellam here about some things that happened around these parts many years ago. And one of them was a swimming hole incident. But it wasn't an incident, it was a real happening, tragic, down on some land that I now own. But my grandmother, White, had a colored woman to help her do her washing, ironing, and all that kind of stuff. And and lived in a little house back of the grandma's house. And the lady had a little boy who was 8, 9, 10, 11 years old. And she went off and he was there by himself. And his mother told him, said, you stay right here and I'll be back now. Do not go to the swimming hole. Of course, the boy had been down there before with others. And that was the last thing she said to him. Well, she went off to work, was gone 2, 3 hours, and came back and couldn't call him. He wouldn't answer. His name was Felix. And she tracked him, saw his tracks in the little road there that went on down and right on to the swimming hole. And she hollered and hollered, and he never answered. So she went back and got some help. My uncle went down, Uncle was about 20 years old at that time. And they found his clothes on the bank. And my uncle waded in and found young Felix was drowned. And so he got him out. But from that day to this, that place has been known as Felix Landing and been used by people swimming, been used for baptizing and other things. But it's still today Felix Landing because of that little boy about 100 years ago.
Betty Holland, January the 28th, 2012, at her home in Salemburg, North Carolina.
I'm Betty Holland. I was Betty Andrews when I came to Pineland in January of 1945. The girls were in uniforms. They all had their uniforms. Mrs. Anderson measured me for my uniform. And when it came, it was large enough it was just way too big. Well, most of the girls had outgrown their uniforms. So I changed jackets with another girl. She got one to fit her, and I got one to fit me. And Ms. Anderson never knew the difference. We'd get up in the mornings, and we had to drill before breakfast. So we would roll our pajamas up, put on a raincoat on top of that, because it was pretty cold, and get out and drill. After we drilled at the Mother's Day Parade, and we also had, we wore uniforms when we left campus. We would go to Fayetteville a lot of times for the day, and we'd wear our uniforms. If you went off campus, you wore your uniform. Otherwise, the girls didn't wear uniforms. The boys did for classes, but we wore our regular clothes. After Miss Jones died, I had only been there 2 months before Miss Jones died. And of course, there went my scholarship immediately. But that didn't matter to me. I was happy. I was back in North Carolina, not off in Virginia. Miss Anderson was a Mary Washington graduate, so she was always kind of favored me because I went to Mary Washington. She thought that was a little bit special. But after Miss Jones's death, we did not have any more military.
A very special thank you to Betty Holland for allowing many of these interviews to be recorded at her home in Salemburg, North Carolina. Phil Insco at Betty Holland's home in Salemburg, North Carolina, January the 28th, 2012.
I'm Phil Insco, Philip G. Insco to be exact, native of Franklin County, North Carolina, born in Rocky Mount, North Carolina in 1927, almost at the end of the year. I had never heard of Salemburg until I went to Wake Forest College as a student, and I roomed with Billy Royal from Salemburg, also his brother Lee, and they told me about Salemburg. And when I graduated from Wake Forest at the end of the fall semester of 1947-48, Billy suggested that I come to Salemburg to interview for a possible job at Edwards Military Institute and Pineland College. So I did. I came down, I had an appointment with Mr. Blanchard, and he showed me around the place. And in fact, he took me over to the bursar's office where Mrs. Blanchard was in charge. And he introduced me to her, and she in turn introduced me to the ladies who were assisting her in the office, one of whom was Ann Stark, Mary Ann Stark. She was behind a petition in the office, and she said, "Oh, let me introduce you to one of our single girls." So she said, "This is Miss Stark." Well, she popped her red head out from behind that petition, and I said, "Ooh, well, I'll just have to see what I can do about that." And sure enough, about a year and a half later, I did. During my first semester here, my job was the lab assistant for Mr. Downs in college chemistry, in addition to teaching the general science and the biology classes. After that semester, Mr. Blanchard asked me if I would consider being the commandant of the junior division of the school starting in the fall, and I agreed to do that. That spring, Miss Ann Stark and I began to date in the parlor. I had no car, so we had to date in the parlor here on campus. And we were married, as I said earlier, we were married here in Salemburg Baptist Church. And Mr. Ashley, the Reverend Mr. Ashley, was the one who officiated the service. And Ann and I lived in an apartment on the bottom floor of the junior barracks building. In fact, we were living there when our first two children were born. Emily was born at Duke, but came back when she was 5 weeks old. She was premature. She came back with us to Salemburg when she was 5 weeks old. Our son Phil was born here, and I can remember that when the first few months of his life, he never shut up at night. He screamed all night long, and I can hear the cadets right now saying, who lived above, "Won't that guy ever shut up?" And but when he turned 3 months old, he stopped crying, so we figured out he had that 3-month colic, and almost to the day he stopped crying, and after that it was no problem for the kids in the dormitory.
Tommy Rich at the home of Betty Holland in Salemburg, North Carolina, January the 28th, 2012.
A day in the life of a cadet at junior barracks. Started in the morning. You'd rise in the morning, get dressed, and you'd march to breakfast. Breakfast was at the dining hall in Palmer. And we'd march to breakfast, and then they'd call us by squads to go in and line up and eat. And we'd have, each individual table would have their own prayers, the best I remember, the blessing. And we'd eat without doing a whole lot of talking. And once we got through, we could casually walk back to junior barracks and get ready for classes. And we'd get all our stuff, get ready for classes. And we'd meet in front of the barracks in formation, and we'd march to class. And have class from what time we got there and then till lunch. Then we'd have formation and march to lunch at the dining hall in Palmer. And then back to class. Till class ended that evening, we'd march back to junior barracks and get ready for drilling practice. And we'd do that every evening. And after that, we'd have a little free time, then we'd go march to supper. And head back to the barracks after we got through eating. And later on, we'd have study hall, and you had to have certain grades. You could study in your room, or if you had less than that, you could study in the group. And backing up just a little bit, we always marched to chapel twice a week, and it was always on Tuesday and Thursday at the chapel. And we went to senior barracks, junior barracks, and the Pineland and Whitehall girls would go to chapel at the same time we would on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Okay.
And church.
And we'd march to church on Sundays. We'd have Sunday school at junior barracks, and once we got through with Sunday school, we'd fall out in formation and march to church for the church services, and then we'd march back after church. And The rest of the time it's a regular routine as far as studying or times we went to eat.
Gertrude Royal at her home in Greensboro, North Carolina, March the 9th, 2012.
This fine Bavarian china, painted in gold leaf and monogrammed in gold in the R, was painted at Pineland College on fine Bavarian china by Fanny Trellington Royal, probably about 1927. Fanny was involved in all the art classes at Pineland College as long as they existed. This beautiful set has the 8 place settings, including the soup bowl, the beautiful tureen, a huge platter, cups and saucers, salad plate, fruit plate, and dinner plate. It's lovely, it's all in good condition, and was painted lovingly by Fanny Trellington Royal at Pineland College around 1927. This elegant china is one of the finest examples of the fine work they were capable of producing in the Pineland College china painting classes.
Lee Royal at his home in Greensboro, North Carolina, March the 9th, 2012.
In my high school last 2 or 3 years, I was in school at Salemburg. I finished in 41, and I'd say 39, 40, 41 years. My father bought equipment to offer a meat market, offering fresh pork, fresh beef. And in those days, the state or the government did not have any strict rules or any rules about marketing of beef and cows and that sort of stuff. So usually on Thursday afternoons after I got home from school, we had a black fellow named General Cooper, G-E-N-E-R-E-L, General Cooper. My dad would have bought a cow from a farmer in the immediate area, and Daddy would tell us where the farmer lived and to go out to his place, and the farmer was expecting us to be there sometime on a Thursday afternoon, usually around 4 o'clock, 4:30. General Cooper would have by that time accumulated all the butchering utensils that he would need to butcher a cow. And we'd put it on the back of my dad's truck and we'd go out to the farm, and the farmer would say, "This cow over here." And he'd point out, if he had numbers of cows, he'd point out the one that he had sold to my dad to be butchered. Well, in arriving at the farmer's house or farm, we would have been looking around for trees that were tall enough and strong enough that would have limbs or a limb that we could throw a block and tackle across, and we would lead the cow to that position, and we would have thrown the block and tackle across the limb, and in preparation for the butchering of the cow, General would say, "Now lead the cow right underneath this limb." And I would lead the cow underneath the limb of the tree. And General would have determined whether he wanted to kill the cow with a shotgun or an axe. The bunt side of the axe, the blunt side. And I would hold the cow's head down toward the ground, and General would take the shotgun and shoot him right between the eyes, and the cow would drop immediately. Or he may determine, based upon his experience, he would take the back side of the axe, stand behind the cow's head, and he would come down with a major force and hit the cow right behind the horns. And the cow would drop immediately. And from that process, I won't go into the details, but we go into the process of then butchering and skinning the cow and cutting it up into 4 quarters and taking it back to town.
What do you do with all the blood?
Well, all the blood and all the stomach parts and intestines were left on the ground, or we would take a shovel with us and dig an indentation on the ground, and we would put all that stuff in it and then cover it over with dirt.
And whose farm was this? Your daddy's farm?
No, this was on the farm of the person
where you purchased
that we purchased the cow from. And we would ask the farmer, we want to take him over here and butcher the cow over here if that's all right with you. And of course, it was always agreeable to the farmer because he was getting paid for his cow. And so we would take that cow back to town, and it would be hung up in our cold storage room overnight, and then on Friday morning, Estel Simmons was a guy that would then, beginning Friday morning, he would start cutting up the cow into all different kinds of shapes and steaks and roast and beef of various kinds, and we'd sell about 80 or 90% of that cow on Friday and Saturdays. And then we'd have the other 10 or 20% left over to sell during the early part of the week. And then the next week, beginning on Thursday, we'd go through the routine again. So that's how we maintained a supply of beef for our clientele, for stew beef and steak and roast and whatever it was they wanted.
Now, before your daddy started doing that, then how did people get any of that meat, any meat?
Well, they'd have to kill a cow themselves, or they'd have to go to Kellam or to Fayetteville or someplace to buy meat. So that's the way it...
And so there was not really a meat market, a place to buy meat in Salemburg until...
No, that's right.
And this started, when do you think your daddy started doing this?
Well, it was 1938 or 39. Somewhere along there, maybe about then, maybe a little before, but that's about the time I got involved in it, about 38 or 39, somewhere in that neighborhood.
Pat Jones, February the 1st, 2012, in Salemburg, North Carolina, at the home of Betty Holland.
Okay, my name is Russell Pascal Jones. Of course, I have a nickname, Pat. Everybody knows me as Pat, but I was born a couple of miles northeast of Salemburg, and I have an older sister that was 6 years older than I am, or is 6 years older than I am. I have a couple of brothers younger than I am. One of them is deceased now. But as we were all growing up on the farm, we always came to Salemburg on Saturday night, and my mother always brought butter and eggs that she'd collected during the week to Mr. Ramby Royal's store and exchanged them. And we visited, and so my mother and dad and Mr. Ramby and Miss Carrie were very good friends. And of course, Celeste grew up with Kenneth and Emily and Billy.
Billy Royal, at the home of Wanda Royal in Wade, North Carolina, January the 30th, 2012.
During our childhood, there wasn't such a thing as TV or anything. We did have radio, and we had a big radio in our store that we kept playing, and particularly during the national boxing matches like Joe Louis and so forth, a lot of people didn't have radios, and so it was sitting at the back of our store next to a side door, and we would turn it wide open, and people would come and stand outside of the store to listen to the boxing match. And that was kind of recreation. The other things that went on in terms of recreation was there were always medicine men that came through town during the summer, and they would set up a shop on a vacant lot back of our store and sell things and have little comedy programs and whatever. In addition to that, we would have silent movies in the summertime. Some company would come through and they'd have fix up a sheet on a rack in the middle of the street in front of the stores, and traffic would be blocked off. This was generally on a Wednesday night. And people would come on their wagons or drive or bring chairs and sit and watch a silent movie, which was put on the street. And if people were driving through town, they'd have to go around the block. And there were not any specific regulations. At another time, Uncle Sam did silent movies next to his store, which was around the next block from us. And they would have somebody playing the piano or some music while that silent movie was going on.
Jefferson Strickland at his home in Salemburg, North Carolina, February the 6th, 2012.
About 1951, there's a Honeyland Grill built by two guys, Johnny Holland and Stacy Honeycutt. The honey part being from Honeycutt and the land come from Holland. Well, it just so happens that Johnny Holland's father was John Love Holland Sr., the best known contractor of his day in Roseboro, Salemburg, perhaps even Sampson County. Well, Johnny's father built the grill in 1951. And after just a month or so of operating the grill, the two of them cooking the hamburgers, hot dogs, and French fries and cheeseburgers, they decided they needed someone to wait on the cars, the customers in the cars. And so they contacted me one night at church. During the Christmas program at Salemburg Baptist Church, they asked, would you like to work for us at the grill? I said, what's my job? Curb hop. I didn't even know what curb hop was, but they got me a little white jacket. And I went to work in 1951 at Honeyland Grill in Salemburg. Might have been 1952, but somewhere along about that time. My little white jacket on, the starched white jacket, a little cap, a little tray. And I began to wait on cars that would come to be served. And this is what Honeyland Grill was all about. Hamburgers, hot dogs, milkshakes, cheeseburgers, and that was about the extent of the menu. Lots of people, a short order, and the place was always busy. Wonderful place, lots of wonderful people, reasonable prices. It's just a time when people wanted to get along. People wanted to be with others, and it reached out from Salemburg, and people in Kellam we became one large community. Everything west of Kellam would be at Salemburg on any night during the weekend that you can think about. The crowds would be there. I don't know how many cars, probably 50, 75, something like that. But they would be there, all tooting the horns and blinking the lights, wanting to serve us. So we're just there to spend the evening in Salemburg at the Honeyland Grill.